Good morning. As you can see, we're going to start Unit 2, Learning Target 2, Classical Error. Classical error lasted between 600 BCE and 600 CE. The essential question, what caused the classical error to develop and what effects have they had on modern society, is what we're going to try to answer. First of all, we need to look back at civilizations. The civilizations expanded beyond their original river valleys to become what we call empires. The first of these being the Persian Empire. This is the one that we're going to look at. As you can see, it engulfed parts of Mesopotamia, as well as modern-day Iran, Pakistan, etc. This is a map that shows you exactly where the Persian Empire existed. Some of the characteristics we need to understand about classical empires is they were very powerful, had very powerful militaries, effective governments. The currency was uniform. They came up with a measuring system. Citizens service for the citizens was expected. Large territorial control, etc. They also had strong military technology. They instituted public works systems, legal codes such as Hammurabi's Code. As you can see in this picture, the monuments, and they were also patrons of the arts and of learning. Some of the causes of the development of classical civilizations included the expansion of the original river valley areas, conquering of surrounding people by military force in order to gain resources. The effects, there were a total of 8 of them. Development of more complex institutions of government, dominant form of political organization. Future civilizations copied and emulated classical empires. You can see an empire is defined in this slide. Greeks in India modelized what we call like decentralized governments, in which they didn't have a common leading group. They were all their own individual entities, whereas Rome and China modeled what we call centralized government, which is what we have here in the United States. We have a federal government, much like that we have today. In a centralized government, they had one government controlling all of it. As you can see in this map, India was decentralized. They each had their own independent states. Extensive trade routes were developed, including the Silk routes, creation of sophisticated technology, and increased social stratification. In other words, inequality among social classes. There are 3 areas that empires were established: the Mediterranean area, India, and China, and we'll look at each of these separately. First one we're going to look at is Persia. This is a map of the Persian Empire, more detailed. You can see here parts of Armenia all the way over into Greece, Macedonia, parts of Egypt, Syria, the Babylon, as we've talked about last time. Modern-day boundaries from Eastern Europe all the way to Pakistan to southern Russia, all the way to the Sudan in Africa, as you can see right here on the map. Some of the political characteristics included the unification of imperial power, dividing territory into provinces, using strong military to maintain their power. They connected what we call the empire with a road called the Royal Road. This was not only a trade network, but it was a network of roads that intertwined. As you can see on the slide, it's 1,677 miles in length, and it kept the empire together as an easy means of travel, etc. In the Persian political characteristics, they created a advanced postal system. They had what we call Persian satraps. As you can see, this is a picture here. These were advisors, so to speak. They were the eyes and ears of the king. They were governors of each of the different independent states that reported back to the king and told him what was going on. They also codified laws such as Hammurabi. They created a system of judges to maintain order. Zoroastrianism, it was the official religion. It was tolerant of other beliefs, yet the ideas spread to the Hebrews and influenced Judaism, like the belief in Satan and angels and things of that nature. Here's a picture of some of their writing, their language, the Persian language. That limited resources remain. So most of what we know about the Persians in terms of writing came from the Greeks. Which leads us to the Greeks. Those are the main characteristics of the Persians that you need to know. Make sure you've taken notes on all those. Now the Greeks. How did the emergence of this civilization change, or of this empire change civilization? Here's a map of the Greeks. You can see it's made up of many islands and small peninsulas. It was extremely mountainous peninsula. Had access to trade with Asia Minor and Northern Africa, so it was a major trade network, part of the major trade network. The problem with it, because it was so many islands and mountainous areas, they never had any kind of unification. Politically, they were divided into city-states, the two most famous being Sparta and Athens. And we'll talk about each of those here shortly. They grew as a small empire when city-states established colonies in areas along the Black Sea, Italy, and North Africa. Some of the political characteristics included the conflict between the Greeks in Asia Minor and the Persian Empire, which led to the Persian Wars, the Greco-Persian Wars that lasted from 500 to 479 BC. There's a map here that shows some of those encounters. Because of the Greeks really weren't supposed to win the war. They were led by a guy by the name of Alexander the Great. He helped unify them because of the Greeks' victory, not under Alexander the Great. As you can see here, animosity between the city-states led to civil war, which we call the Peloponnesian Wars, and eventually led to the decline of the Greek city-states' power. They weren't unified under Alexander the Great, and we'll talk a little bit more about him as we go. Democratic ideas were based upon the Athenian experiment of limited democracy. From the Greeks is where we get the idea of democracy in our governments today. Citizens in a democracy are free. They were Greek-born and males. They could vote. They could serve in the assembly. They could also be part of the Council of 500. This is kind of like their Senate and the House of Representatives. They're expected to give military service, participate in discussion, and serve jury duty, just like we are here in the United States. The Greeks were a polytheistic group. They had many gods and goddesses. This is where Greek mythology comes into play. We know a lot about the Greek mythology through their writings and so forth of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, some of these great philosophical men of our time, of their time. Ideas of the Greeks were adopted eventually by the Romans. A Hellenistic era emerged shortly after Alexander the Great. This culture celebrated the human experience. It focused on the body, the human body, and its greatness. They stressed science, mathematics, astronomy. As you can see here, Archimedes and Galen were two of these important contributors. Notable creation of architecture, the use of columns, sculptures, and so forth, as you see in this picture here. The Greeks also are known for their Olympics, the Olympic Games, the creation of competition, along with their architectural achievements. Their great poems, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, were based upon the heroes of their time. The idea of comedy and tragedy, or what we call our local drama, came from them. This shows some of the ancient legacies of the Greeks. You can pause it and look at some of these. The Hippocratic Oath is one. Their political systems, there were three types in ancient Greece. The democracy came from ancient Athens. The republic became a form in Rome, and the oligarchy was from Sparta. And we'll talk about that here briefly. Now we're going to look at ancient Athens and Sparta very briefly. We know the movie 300 and the Spartan society was dominated by its military. They believed that military provides security and protection, as you saw in the movie. This is obviously a picture from the movie Sparta. When boys were born, the government took them away. If he was unhealthy, he was taken outside the city and left to die. Healthy boys were trained to become soldiers and be part of the Spartan army. Boys trained by running, jumping, doing those kind of things. They weren't given shoes. They weren't even given warm clothing during the winter. Boys were given enough food to survive. They had to steal their food, which made them tougher. If they got caught, they'd be whipped. This tells you a little bit more about the soldier's life And finally, the life of Spartan soldier in general. Physical training was part of their life, military training, values, etc. As they became adult, military service became an important piece, and they became full citizens at the age of 30. Women had more power in Sparta. They owned land. They ran the household while the men were off at war. Women didn't do jobs that other Greek women did, like weave clothing, but they left them for slaves. Spartan women also trained physically. They cared about their bodies. They were strong mothers with healthy children. Their job was to breed good soldiers. Their government was what we call an oligarchy. It was set up to control the city's helots or slaves. The helots lived horrible lives. They were taken very poorly care of. They outnumbered the Spartans, but the fear of the army kept them from rebelling, as you can see here. Sparta was ruled by two kings who had very little power. Athens and Sparta were rivals. In addition to physical training, the Athenians valued their education, thinking, the arts, more of a humanist type of person, whereas the Spartans were more militaristic. Unlike Sparta, Athens learned to read, count, sing. Spartans didn't care about those kind of things. From a young age, boys from rich families improved both body and mind in ancient Athens. They trained and devoted only 2 years of their lives to the army, not their whole life. Rich boys in Athens had tutors, such as guys like Plato and Aristotle. They learned to speak in public. We call this oratory. They helped to participate in government. Women and girls had no rights. They must obey what the men said. They received no education. In Athens, they had almost no rights at all. Some learned to read, write, but most their job was taking care of the household. Alliances began to form. City-states formed alliances with others to make their military goals easier. Southern Greece, including area of Sparta, joined what we call the Peloponnesian League. This league wanted to stop Athens from growing stronger, which led us to the Peloponnesian War. It was a civil war between Athens and Sparta, as well as their allies. Eventually, they would come to a truce. Inevitably, the Peloponnesian War did nothing but weaken Greece and made it very susceptible to outside invasion, which is where Alexander the Great will come in and will take over this area. He's from Macedonia. He'll take over ancient Greece, and we'll talk about that soon. If you have any questions, go back and listen to this again. We will discuss some of this in class as well. Thank you for your attention.